If you've ever sat around the campfire at night in the middle of the woods, you likely know the primal feeling of something just over your shoulder. Your body is a little tense, waiting for something to jump out at you. And for some reason, we love to heighten that feeling even more by trying to terrify ourselves and each other by telling scary stories, waiting for the perfect time to freak each other out, a total jump scare opportunity. Eventually, someone asks, "Do you know any scary stories?" And everyone waits with anticipation at that moment of ultimate fright. Well, at least some of us do. But the scariest ones aren't the ones that are gory or have a high body count, but the scariest stories are the ones that really happened. Now, I'm going to tell you about one of the scariest stories I've ever heard, and it's all true. So, as always, grab your cup of tea, get your big girl panties on, and let me tell you about what happened one night in the dark woods at the Appalachian Trail. Hello, my darlings. I'm so glad you're joining me today. I hope you're doing well. I'm Madam Roman, and for those of you new to the channel, I offer wisdom highlights from a woman's perspective as we put on our highest red-bottom slippers and strut our stuff down the silver brick road to the land of wisdom. We'll explore accounts of true crime, dark histories, mysteries, and mayhem in a constant quest of empowerment, knowledge, and the insight to survival. The following content contains material intended for mature audiences. Viewer discretion advised. Warning, the following video also contains strong language and the use of satire and sarcasm that will sometimes provoke, trigger, and shatter fragile egos perpetually in the clutches of toxic masculinity and the society that enforces and enables them. And if you haven't already, don't forget to like and subscribe and share, and stick around to the end for my Madam Roman wisdom highlights. So on May 8th of 2008, just as the weather was getting warmer and the days were getting longer, two longtime friends, Scott and Sean, decided to go camping and fishing at one of their favorite spots, Dismal Creek, Virginia, on the Appalachian Trail, or as AT as it's known. The AT stretches more than 2,000 miles from Georgia to Maine. Its incredible beauty draws thousands of hikers to its trails every year. And just like many other places that draw in visitors because of its beauty, adventure, and isolation, the AT has claimed lives through accidents or intention, whether self-inflicted or by others' actions. The friends decided to drive separately in their own vehicles and meet up at their spot. On his way there in his truck, Scott saw a poor, scraggly, emaciated dog wandering along the road. He was so skinny that his ribs were showing. Concerned, Scott stopped his truck, and as he approached the dog, a man that was equally skinny and disheveled appeared. The man was friendly and introduced himself as Ricky Williams and his dog, Bo. After a bit of small talk, the man mentioned that he was having a hard time catching any fish. So Scott, being a kind soul and growing up with the rule of the AT that if you find someone in need, you help them, he got into his cooler and gave Ricky a fruit trout that he had. The man thanked him and asked him where they were planning to camp. It was about 1.5 miles from Wapiti Shelter, a small wooden structure made for hikers to take shelter while hiking on the AT. The man said that he was camping in the same direction, and as he was about to leave, he mentioned to Scott that maybe he would stop by their campsite sometime later. Later, while Scott was gathering wood for a fire, Sean arrived at the campsite and was setting up his tent when the man and his dog approached. As a normal response, Sean was unsure of a stranger approaching from the woods, but the man gave his name as Ricky Williams and that he knew Scott. Sean eased that Scott knew the stranger that he had never seen before. Sean was also raised camping in these woods, and he too knew the unspoken rule to help other hikers in need, and that this man and his dog looked to fit the bill. Scott returned, and the three sat around by the fire talking as darkness fell. Ricky regaled them with tales of his life as an engineer and that he worked for NASA. The men listening only felt pity for Ricky and figured he was a homeless alcoholic, but completely harmless. Seeing that Ricky was in no hurry to move on to his campsite, Sean and Scott decided to offer him and his dog dinner of trout and beans. Neither of them feared this weak, frail man as he got up to leave after the meal. Calling Bo over, Ricky casually pulled out a .22 from his coat pocket and shot Sean in the head. Quickly, in a split second of shock and confusion, Ricky turned the gun to Scott and shot him, hitting him in the neck. He then turned the gun back onto Sean, who, shot in the head, was still standing. But this was and is a rather big dude. Sean is 6'4", 325 pounds. Ricky decided to shoot him again, this time hitting him in the chest. Back to Scott, holding his neck wound, he had gotten to his feet and began running to get away, but Ricky shot him in the back of the neck. Again, Sean, miraculously still alive and standing after a bullet to the head and chest, ran to his truck, opened the door, and got into the driver's seat. And like a horror movie, just as Sean looked up, Ricky was standing at the passenger door, pointing a gun at him through the window. But when Ricky pulled the trigger, the gun clicked. He was out of bullets. Sean floored the truck to get away from his attacker, and a bit down the road, he spotted Scott coming out of the woods. Once in, Scott's wounded neck splattered blood everywhere in the truck, and he realized plugging his neck wound with his finger was the only way he was going to keep himself from bleeding to death. Both men were struggling to remain conscious from blood loss and their horrendous wounds. Sean, shot in the head, driving, was starting to lose sight in one eye, so Scott started helping him steer. They were desperate to get away from Ricky, thinking that he may take Scott's truck to come after them, and they needed immediate medical help to stay alive. But the isolation that the AT offers from people and communication was turning deadly. On the moonless night, there were no lights anywhere, and the winding road had dangerous drop-offs on either side. And because they were driving so erratically, they thought for sure that they were going to crash. With no cell service, no building or houses around, there was no way to get help they desperately needed. They had gone miles down the mountain road, and it wasn't until the third house they came upon that it looked like someone was home, and they stopped the truck. Scott got out of the truck, banged on the door, yelling for someone to call 911, that they had been shot. A woman and her son came out. Now, the woman, Melissa, she had reservations about opening the door. She thought this was a home invasion or a fight between strangers gone horribly wrong. But her son, Randy, returned from assisting the man that was still in the truck, and he said he recognized Sean as having dated a friend of his. They called authorities, but the nearest help was 20 miles away. Melissa feared that they would die before help could get there. After waiting frantically for 20 minutes for help to come, she called emergency services again, asking where they were. Fearing that he wasn't going to make it, Scott just wanted to talk to his family before he died. So Melissa dialed the phone, likely as a sense of loss is what else she could do. Ambulance and police finally arrived. Sean had long lost the ability to speak from swelling in his throat, so Scott gave a description of their attacker. Randy's grandfather, who also lived at the house, immediately thought of Randall Lee Smith, a man that had gone missing 6 weeks before. After Randy ran to the local general store for the missing person poster, Scott positively identified his attacker, Ricky, as the man in the photo. The police put out an APB for Scott's truck and the man that needed to be captured. But you see, the missing man, Randall Lee Smith, was a bit known in the area. He was declared missing after 6 weeks when neighbors noticed mail piling up at his home and the utilities had been shut off due to non-payment. No one knew where he was, but he was not a helpless lost man. Most that knew Randall thought he had most likely vanished into the woods, to live, to die, not sure anyone knew or cared. But this was not his first brush with the law either. Randall Lee Smith was a twice convicted murderer from an incident almost exactly 27 years earlier in 1981. They knew exactly who they were looking for. While Sean and Scott were taken to the hospital by ambulance and then by helicopter where they would be immediately treated in surgery, the police were desperately searching the area for Randall Lee Smith. A state trooper spotted the stolen truck and the man being sought. When Randall saw the officer, he sped off on the same treacherous, winding mountain roads that Sean and Scott had driven while trying not to bleed to death. But Randall lost control of the truck, and it flipped over several times in a possible suicide attempt. Smith was injured but alive and taken to the hospital for treatment, the same hospital his victims were being treated at. Now, Randall Lee Smith was born June 29, 1953. He was raised by his single mother, Loretta, in Parisburg, Virginia, population 2,700. While she worked 2 jobs, one at the hospital, relatives cared for him. Randall was a loner in school, not playing with the other children or having many friends. He spent much of his time at home or in the woods, particularly the woods along the Appalachian Trail, which bordered his house. However, from an early age, when around people, he would tell lies and exaggerated tales of his life. He would often tell about the money he had, the women he was dating, or his lavish life in Florida or Las Vegas. When it came to lies, Randall was Libra-level lying. His level was so frequent and outrageous that he became known to locals as Lion Randall. In 1981, Randall met a couple on the AT Trail, Robert and Susan, both social workers from Maine. They were hiking the AT to raise money for a school for mentally challenged children that Robert's mother ran. Much like Sean and Scott, they probably felt pity for him as he told them his tall tales about his life that they knew were not true. It was not until a solo hiker that knew Robert and Susan notified police that they were missing when the two didn't show up for a planned lunch date that anyone realized something was wrong. A search began in the area and police came upon Wapiti Shelter after witnesses had seen the couple there. There wasn't any evidence of anything happening at the shelter or of the couple until one officer noticed a red stain between the floorboards. After lifting up the board, he discovered a large stain of blood and knew that they had had the right location of something horrible. They continued searching the surrounding area and eventually found a shallow, leaf-covered grave with a sleeping bag inside. Inside the sleeping bag was Susan's lifeless body. She had defensive wounds and had put up a fight to live, but had been viciously overcome, stabbed, and beaten to death. The next day, investigators brought in cadaver dogs to locate the remains of Robert. Unfortunately, he too was found in a shallow grave inside a sleeping bag. He had been shot 3 times in the head with a .22. Because of the difference of how Susan and Robert were killed, police presumed that the perpetrator attacked them while they were sleeping and that Robert had been killed first in order to assault Susan. But because her body had not been found for 11 days after her murder, sexual assault could not be determined as a motive for the attack. In searching for clues, Susan's backpack was found and the biggest lead to the killer. Now, this is one of those moments where the entire Scooby-Doo cast gets together to reveal the villain and solve the case. The "could you ask for more evidence" was a fingerprint in blood on one of the books inside the backpack. It was Randall's fingerprint in Susan's blood inside Susan's book, inside Susan's backpack. Investigators must have thought the case was solved. All they needed to do was find and arrest the bad guy, and he would be behind bars forever. In addition, when police came with a search warrant to Randall's mother's house, where Randall still lived, they found his clothing soaked in blood, some of the hiker's belongings, and laminated pornography. Copious amounts of pornography. His other odd fascination was evidenced as well. It's believed that when he would visit his mother at her job at the hospital, he would steal instruments and make sex toys out of them, and these were found in the home. Now, I'm a curious cat to a fault, and I have an imagination, but I have a hard time trying to picture the instruments that I have had to medically endure with any kind of sexual connotation, but okay. Oh, and a cherry on top, authorities found a note that stated that he, Randall, had been kidnapped by 2 people and that he was going to be killed. Now, whatever distraction or urgency that this was meant to provoke from law enforcement did not work. Remember, this was Lion Randall. The police didn't believe the note and they knew he had fled. Randall and his truck were eventually found in Myrtle Beach, ironically where the lead detective had gone on vacation at the same time. Can you imagine? When police searched his truck, they found a note that said, "This boy and girl have been so nice to me. It's going to be a shame when the time comes to get rid of them. I will be far away when truck and those people are found." This guy had a serious fascination with writing shit down. When Randall was captured, he was gaunt, emaciated, disheveled, and covered in bug bites. He claimed to have amnesia and no memory of anything, including who he was. However, the detective, he was like, "Nah, I'm not going to play this." So he convinced the poor amnesiac man that he should allow them to take him to the hospital because the bug bites looked so severe, and surely he didn't want them to become infected. And this ploy actually worked. The man agreed to go to the hospital in order to be treated, but he had to sign a consent form, and on that form, he signed Robert Lee Smith. What a fucking dumbass. Randall was arrested for the deaths of Robert and Susan. However, against the cries of the public and other law enforcement, the prosecutor did not believe that a first-degree murder conviction with a life sentence or a death penalty sentence could be guaranteed because he couldn't prove a motive for the heinous crime. He didn't want to use the possibility of sexual assault as motive because the evidence couldn't prove it. Even with the damning evidence of Randall's fingerprint and Susan's blood in her book and the note found in his truck and his blood-soaked clothes. But of course, there was no DNA testing at the time. So the prosecution pushed the families of Robert and Susan to allow a plea deal with Randall. Robert's father was an Episcopalian minister and didn't believe in the death penalty, but he agreed that he did not ever want Randall to get out of prison. Both families agreed to the plea deal, and Randall was convicted of 2 counts of second-degree murder and sentenced to 15 years imprisonment for each conviction. However, this sentence was to be served concurrently, not consecutively, which meant that the 15-year sentence for each murder would be served together, not one after the other. So when Randall served 15 years, he was mandatorily released. The only extension on his sentence that could be allowed was a probationary period of 10 years rather than a few months. The community was outraged and protested. There were outcries, but it didn't matter. In 1996, after being convicted of killing 2 people in cold blood, Randall was a free man. Many in the community felt that it was not a matter of if he would commit another crime, but when. One seasoned AT hiker, Warren Doyle, protested with a sign outside of the courthouse and said that if Randall offends again after his release, perhaps the people responsible for the plea bargain should be put on trial. The prosecutor that arranged the plea deal with Randall died 10 years before Randall's release. So, in 2008, when police identified Sean and Scott's attacker as Randall Lee Smith, the news was not shocking. As Sean and Scott remained clinging to life, 2 days after the attacker and the truck rollover, Randall was released from hospital into police custody and charged with 2 counts of attempted capital murder. While in jail on May 10, 2008, Randall was found unresponsive on the floor of his cell. Medics were called, but he was pronounced dead. He had suffered a blood clot from the injuries of the truck rollover. His death did save the community from having to endure and pay for a trial and any further expenses and dealings with Randall Lee Smith. Sean and Scott would survive and live to tell their story of the encounter they had with the Appalachian Trail murderer. Sean still believes that Randall has other victims and has been speculated by other investigators and sleuths after a cache of eyeglasses, knives, and women's underwear were found among Randall's things. But it's hard to determine if he stole these, bought these, or trophied them from other victims. So, for today's Madam Roman Wisdom Highlights. Number 1, it's good to follow the AT rule. Be kind and take care of others. Number 2, it's also good to listen to the rule of your gut and trust your instincts. They're there for your survival. And finally, wherever you are, know how to get away. Please let me know if you have any comments or questions down below. I'm always interested in hearing what you have to say. Don't forget to check out my other videos, The Real Exorcism Case of Anna Uckland that inspired the book and the film The Exorcist, the scariest movie ever. And I did a review video of Netflix's monsters series, The Ed Gein Story, which is absolutely a work of misogynistic fiction. So if you're interested in that. Thank you for watching. Be safe. Sending you silver streaks of wisdom.